Welcome to the Trust Factor Radio, bringing you interviews and insights to unlock the power of the subconscious mind to create authority, credibility, and trust. With your host, the Authority Architect and best-selling author, Neil Howe.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is your host, Neil Howe, and today my special guest is Damian Turco. Damian is an attorney in Massachusetts, and he helps people through one of life's most terrible experiences, divorce. He also practices other family law matters and educates and advocates for his clients in pursuit of a fair and reasonable resolution. Damian founded and owns Turco Legal, PC, a Massachusetts divorce and family law firm of 6 lawyers. He runs the business of his practice in addition to handling his own caseload. And Damian is a leader in the Massachusetts legal community, particularly at the Massachusetts Bar Association, where he serves on the organization's executive management board. And he's also the executive director of a nonprofit legal incubator founded by BC, BU, and Northeastern Law Schools. Damian Turco, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Neil. I really appreciate you having me here today.
Well, we are going to talk about one of those situations that nobody ever thinks that they're going to have to go through. Yet, I think over 50% of the population do end up going through that, and that is divorce. Tell us a little bit about your background first, Damian, and how you got into family law and dealing with these cases.
Yeah, sure thing, Neil. Well, I practiced for a little over 10 years now, so I've been at it. I've been doing divorce and family law work that entire time, believe it or not. Why the question usually isn't how I got into this line of work. It's why did you get into this line of work?
Right.
So I mean, I don't really know. I mean, really early on in my practice, like when I first started out, I knew I was kind of an entrepreneurial spirit, and I'd gone to business undergrad before law school, and I had worked for a couple of big corporations before becoming a lawyer, before going back to law school. So it was really my intention to go out and practice law on my own, to start my own practice, and to build it up, and to build kind of a firm up with multiple lawyers. That was kind of my vision back when I was getting started. And the reason I went into family law was one, probably this misconception that I thought it couldn't be all that complicated as a practice area, comparatively speaking, because so many people represent themselves. How difficult could it be? I just have to be a little more knowledgeable than everyone else, and I could kind of get my foot in the door and go from there. Turned out to be incredibly complicated. And but that really is one of the joys in doing this work is getting through complexity where people can't do it on their own. And then the other reason I got into family law was really the business reason, is there's a point of entry into that market for a newer lawyer. So a new lawyer right out of law school looking to start a practice, that lawyer, it's difficult for that lawyer to break into the field of like complex commercial litigation or, multi-million mergers and acquisitions. You don't have the credibility necessary as a new lawyer to really to get those types of cases, and nor would you be competent enough to handle them. But family law is really a spectrum of practitioners, right? I mean, there's super complex, high money cases where you're going to choose probably a very experienced lawyer with many years of experience, many hundreds or maybe thousands of cases under their belt. And those, to get that type of lawyer, you're going to pay a retainer of probably $10,000 to $25,000. Well, and then on the other end of the spectrum, there's all these folks that can't afford lawyers at all. And then there's kind of everything in between. So for a new lawyer starting out who wants to start a practice, there's an entry point at kind of just above the fringe of people who have enough money to hire a lawyer. And so logically, I felt that if I pursued that area and I did some basic marketing, build a website, went out and networked, that sort of thing, and got some mentors and learned what I was doing, that I'd be able to enter into the market and build from there. And that really was true. That is really what I did. It's pretty effective. So that's kind of how I got into family law. I mean, there's other components. I mean, I'm generally pretty even keeled. And so, kind of the more chaos around me, the more reasoned I feel. Like that's my natural place to be. Is people get upset, it's emotional, and I can kind of calm down and cut through it. And so that's helped me in this line of work, because so many people come in here and their world's been really turned upside down. They can't believe that they're in a divorce lawyer's office talking about divorce to begin with. So just being able to calm things down, being even keeled, and putting things in intelligent, or in understandable terms rather. I've always been pretty good at that. So I guess it was kind of a good fit. That might be more why I've lasted in this line of work rather than how I got into it, but it works.
Yeah, well, I mean, people need a cool head, definitely, when emotions are running high. So the fact that you're able to calm people down and give them advice that hopefully they will take is a good thing. Talk to me about what other areas of law, family law covers. Obviously, divorce is a large part of that, but what other things do you cover in family law?
Sure. Yeah, divorce, I'd say, is the largest kind of market share of our practice, of our cases. But we also have people that have child custody issues, that they were never married, and so those are custody and support cases. So kind of like a divorce, except we're not dividing up property or establishing alimony, but still, plenty of work in that realm as well to keep us busy. And then there's another part of family law where we do guardianship work and probate administration and litigation. And they're different legal thresholds, they're different scenarios, but all of our caseload is done in the same group of courts, the probate and family courts in Massachusetts. And like one judge once boiled it down for me, she said, it's really just a bunch of family members arguing about money and kids. Mm-hmm. And that's really what it is. I mean, it's the most central important thing to most of our clients, the most important thing in their entire lives, their financial stability and their family members. And it's all up for grabs. That's like that's the feeling of it. So we deal with all of those types of cases. And then there's some cases that, we resolve a case initially, and then it will come back a few years later, and there might be a modification necessary, or there might be an enforcement action that's necessary, like a contempt action. Someone's not following the order or judgment, and so we need to file an action to persuade them to do so. And that's a good summation of all the cases that we do.
Yeah. So what kind of levels of things do you see? Obviously, there's people that come in that, have just decided they're getting divorced, they're separating amicably, and they just need somebody to work it out. And then you have the contested battles that can, last a while. What do you see the most of?
Yeah, we definitely see more people on the pretty agreeable, there's a couple things that need to be worked out end of the spectrum. I mean, for the number of cases we get more down that end, because that's just where most of the cases are. It's a little too complicated for them to do on their own, but it's not so complicated that we can't be creative and figure out resolution to whatever the complexity is and sort it out. But the other end of the spectrum is litigious cases where there's stuff going on that make it, the facts of some of those cases, the cases that go on all the way to trial, they're typically such that settlement's pretty impossible. There are just some cases where, there might be things outside anyone's control, like mental illness, for instance, where one of the parents might have mental illness, and that's causing our inability to resolve the case, and treatment might be fluctuating, and so things might look stable one day and then another day they don't. Substance abuse is another area that makes resolving a case difficult for the same reason. Sometimes there's bouts of stability, and then sometimes what we think we could rely upon, we can't. We find that out. So those sorts of things. And then there's types of cases, like some custody cases, and it might be a divorce or within the scope of a divorce or a modification, or it might just be a custody case where the parties were never married. Sometimes people will want to, for a number of different reasons, move the children to another part of the country. It's called a removal case in Massachusetts. It's called a relocation case in other states. And it's pretty common especially when the parties have, relocated to our state. They're both from, or one of them at least is from another state. So all their extended family is back some other part of the country. And then the marriage fails, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the first inclination is, oh my gosh, I need to go home. And so those cases tend to be more litigious, because where most local custody cases where both parties live locally, where those cases, there's not that broad of a spectrum of what might happen at trial, right? If we went all the way if we had two parents who lived in the same town, both are relatively involved in the children's lives, and they can flex their schedule so they can be there, there's only so much of a spectrum of what that custody arrangement might end up being. Maybe it's going to be a 1/3 with one parent, 2/3 with the other, or 60-40 or 50-50. So you typically, we end up resolving those cases because we find some compromise and we work it out, and the parties, that's what they want. But a relocation case is like a win-lose case. It's the idea of, having one party relocate with the kids, 1,000, 2,000 miles away, and that just inherently is going to impact the relationship between the children and the other parent. So sometimes you have cases that, you just have this fact pattern and the positions of the parties, like compromise is really difficult. So we don't have as many of those cases, but they involve so significantly more work than the simple ones. So I wish everyone could just work it out and get some guidance from us and work things out. And we always counsel people to do that, because for a bunch of different reasons, but between money and just your life will be better if you don't have ongoing conflict. But sometimes it's just not in the cards.
Right. So Damian, what do both parties look for as an outcome when there's a divorce?
Yeah, well, I'd say there's some universal, I guess it depends on the case, right? Generally speaking, human nature, we want problems to be resolved pretty efficiently and effectively. So a lot of people come into it with that mindset, like, I don't want to spend a lot of money. I want an agreement that makes sense. I want it to be reasonable. But of course, there are cases where something maybe happened, like an extramarital affair, or you might just have parties where, the parties they make decisions from more of an emotional space than from a balanced logic space. And that's just the way we're made. So, oftentimes people come in and they want to resolve their case efficiently and effectively. And then probably just as often people come in and they kind of want to, they believe that the other person's hiding something. They want to get to the truth. They want to make the other person suffer a little bit. Right. And so it's kind of a mix. It really kind of depends on the individual of what they're looking for. And the spectrum is pretty broad because of that. But I can tell you that in almost every case, it probably makes more sense to do your best to, think about what the objective is at the end of the case, right? At the end of the case, you don't want to have a ton of frustration and resentment that you're thinking about every day. You don't want to, wake up every morning like just really upset about everything that had happened. And that might be the way it feels right now for people who are going through the process. But the objective really is like down the road, you want to have less and less of that and more I'm moving forward and focusing on our lives. So you get to that point quicker if you start to kind of force yourself into that thought process. I mean, I might be angry right now, but I know I'm going to need a reasonable solution here. So I'm going to follow the attorney's advice, and I'm going to buy into this reasonable solution because I know it objectively makes sense. I'm just upset about it at the moment.
And is it hard to get people to that point?
I think it just depends on the person. Sometimes people get upset very easily, which is nobody's fault, really. People get upset because that's how they're made and that's how they're wired, and that's it. And so when people have maybe, the brain chemistry that their impulses are more easily controlled, they can sit back, they can kind of just give things thought, and they can be more logical. But if you're wired in a way where you get, your blood pressure rises immediately upon being, feeling like you're being threatened, it's going to be hard to get that person to sort it out, to kind of see things objectively. And I think for me, like people who are successful in my position, you just need to accept that as a fact of life, right? I mean, I can't even fault my client who feels they need to yell at me for 10 minutes and then apologize and say they were wrong. I mean, it's okay. I'm sorry that they feel that way and that's happened, but it can be a really taxing process to go through a divorce. And, it's not uncommon in a contentious case for someone to believe the other party is making up all these lies and they're misrepresenting things. And there's like inherently this fear, like, oh my gosh, although these untruths are going to be believed by the judge and everything's going to go sideways. So there's like an element of fear. So, I mean, I think our ability to get people to see things objectively. I mean, we have a tremendous amount of experience doing this because we do it every single day. But I think it's a lot easier with some folks just because of the way they're built, and there's really not much we can do about that. So,
definitely. Well, what do you see the either party? What kind of mistakes do you see them making maybe before coming for help to an attorney?
Sure. Well, I'm an attorney, right? So I'm an advocate for speaking to an attorney. And so probably the biggest mistake is taking action based on just their own assumptions or what they heard their cousin did in their divorce or what their hairdresser suggested they should do. Like taking action without talking to a lawyer who actually does this every day. And that kind of manifests all different ways. I mean, I see a lot of parties who, more often than not, the father in custody cases, the parties are in an intact relationship, a marriage or a custody, or they're just together and they had a child together and they live together. And the father wants significant time with the child, but the father, because it's a difficult time in the household, the father moves out of the house. And that it's a very common question of, should I move out of the house? Because it's kind of terrible right there in the house at this point. And I mean, it really does depend because we have to look at all the facts and circumstances. And obviously, if there's issues like substance abuse or domestic violence or other types of abuse, those are going to change my opinion. But there's like this risk of when there's contention between the parties and it's about what the ultimate part of it is about what the ultimate custody arrangement is going to be in the case. There's risk in separating before there's a court order, even a temporary court order in place saying this is when the kids are with you versus this is when the kids with the other person. And that is, I mean, if you don't have that in place when you move out, and then the party with the children, the majority of the time, starts to exclude you from the children and act in a way to minimize your parenting role, that's a problem. I mean, that's not only a problem for your relationship with the children, but it's a problem strategically in the case because, the court system doesn't move all that quickly. And so even if we were to run down to the courthouse, file a divorce action, file a motion to get in front of the judge in what we call temporary orders. Some states it's called temporary relief. Get a temporary order from the judge establishing custody. That's going to be a few weeks and sometimes months down the road that we're going to be able to get in front of the judge. And so now, by the time you get to that point, even if you get, you're going to make your argument to the judge that you're an active and involved father. But if you've been out of the house for the past 8 weeks and you've only been seeing the kids, minimally, even though through no fault of your own, but things have been going fine with the children, the judge might be inclined to just continue something more akin to the status quo because the judge sees the children doing relatively okay and allows things and just feels, I don't want to rock the apple cart too much. I'm just going to keep things similar to what they are right now. So now I think another way to deal with that situation is to talk to a lawyer and put all the facts on the table and get an objective assessment and figure out a game plan. Like what is it that you're trying to accomplish and how can we go about accomplishing that best? And I think it's really hard to undo things that have been established already. It's hard to undo the facts.
So, Damian, what other myths or misconceptions do people believe about getting a divorce that are not true, or just like you said right there, you can't undo some of these things?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say there's really a big misconception about how much a divorce costs, because there really is a very broad spectrum of what a divorce might cost. And some people they don't even go to the divorce lawyer. They don't even do the free consultation because they're fearful that it's going to be an astronomical cost. There are so many available resources out there today that would, that people can get representation really on a budget. And the way the court rules have worked, and it's in Massachusetts, but this is consistent nationwide, is the court rules are such that attorneys can be hired on a very limited basis as needed to really precisely come in and serve certain functions. And there's other lawyers these days that are doing flat fees and that sort of thing. So the reason I want to touch on this is because there's this thing called the justice gap, this is part of my work on the incubator, where I'm the executive director. It really tries to tackle those in the justice gap. And my practice is really geared primarily towards full paying clients. We do some sliding scale stuff. We do some work with flat fee work, but 80% of the people that need lawyers in the probate, or 80% of the people in the probate and family court can't afford lawyers and they go unrepresented. So I think, and that tells me, even though there's resources out there, those folks are not really exploring them. They're discounting that there might even be a resource that might work. So I'd say folks that are concerned about the cost should really just go get a free consultation, which most family law lawyers out there, they do them. So it's probably the biggest misconception. One of the biggest misconceptions I do see out there.
Yeah. How about the dividing of the wealth and the custody of the children? How do both parties feel about that? Well,
that's I would say that the dividing of the wealth is people come in and speak to me about kind of this fear that their spouse has told them they're going to take everything they have. And I mean, clearly I hear that and I say, well, that's coming from an emotional position. That's either coming from either to manipulate you into some sort of agreement, or that's coming from with the intent of just scaring you for one reason or another. but it's really not what happens. I mean, we go through the probate and family court, and in Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. And while that's not completely consistent what that means in every state, it generally means fairness. And so you're really not going to come into the court and go in front of the judge, even if you were to go all the way to trial on a case, and the judge give one party, the entirety of an estate. And in most cases, it's a 50-50 division of assets and liabilities, whatever those might be. And those typically include retirement assets, where the states draw the line between marital and non-marital property differs slightly from state to state. But generally speaking, everything you've accumulated during the course of the marriage is going to be considered marital property, and it's probably going to be divided pretty evenly, if not evenly.
So how have things changed now, or people's views or fact-based, where, the husband gets less custody and has to pay more of the money?
Yeah, no, I think they have. I remember when I was a kid, I'm 41 now. When I was a kid, my parents got divorced when I was pretty young, and my dad had us every other weekend, and my mom had us pretty much the rest of the time. And that was kind of the norm back then, back in like the early 80s. And, I still have some people coming in that think that's all they're going to get. And that they're just going to have to shovel over their paycheck and everything they've earned, and they're hardly ever going to see their kids. And that's really not where we are today. That's really evolved. So, I would say the most common parenting plan that I see is more of one party's having 2/3 of the time and the other party having 1/3 of the time. Between that and like a 60-40 break, that's probably the most common breakdown we see. And the next most common we deal with is an equal parenting time. So I think that the courts are much more receptive these days to genuinely looking at what makes the most sense for the kids when it comes to a custody case. It's a best interest of the children standard, and that's a pretty universal standard. In Massachusetts, that's the law. And there's research, there's plenty of research and data that shows that children with two active and involved parents are going to develop better than children who don't have access to that other parent. So whenever the judges have the opportunity, whenever it's practical, and it makes sense, and it seems to be a way to get two active and involved parents in these kids' lives, the judges will try to maximize that. So I think that's and I think that when it comes to support, there's really even a narrower margin of what might happen when it comes down to support. Talking about child support or alimony, child support, you're going to look at state guidelines. I think every state has presumptive child support figures that are essentially a calculation. So it's really just plugging your information into a calculation. It gives you a presumptive number. Presumptive number means that it could be overcome, but it's typically not. You got to think that judges have a tremendous amount of cases, and they're not going to want to reinvent the wheel and think of exceptions to the rule on a large percentage of cases. They're going to want to just go with the presumptive figure unless there's a strong basis to deviate from that. So it's really pretty well defined what would happen in issues of support. And I think, one of the biggest benefits to having a consultation is just, I love them because I can just explain to people, you really don't have to worry so much because the things you're worried about are essentially not going to happen. What's going to happen is this, X, Y, and Z. So really, even that's rewarding. I don't have when the client is not ready to move forward, just educating the prospective client is a rewarding feeling for me.
Right, and you seem to be very good at that, giving out the education and advocating for your clients. And is that really what it comes down to? Is just kind of misinformation and really looking at the facts rather than, hanging everything on the emotions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it. I mean, there is a big advocacy piece. The judges do have discretion and, they do have discretion within equitable distribution and within custody arrangements. And sometimes there are facts that are in dispute that might be a basis that might result in a big swing, a bigger range of what might happen. And so, being well prepared and advocating for your clients is a big part of this. I mean, if we're well prepared and we know the case well, and we're basically preparing as if we're going to go to trial, which is pretty much how we operate, then we're in a better position to resolve the case. So, that's really what you want to do. It's kind of that balance between education and advocacy and preparation.
Right. Obviously, you have to be prepared, and you want the best resolution for both parties. But ultimately, it's the kids, if there are kids, that are the ones that we really have to think about in these circumstances. Well, Damian, we've covered a lot of information today. If there's something that we might not have touched on yet that you would like to share, what might that be?
Well, no, I really appreciate the opportunity, Neil. I mean, as a member of the legal community, I guess I'd like to say that, we kind of like in movies and television shows, we get kind of a bad rap, and I think divorce attorneys might take the cake on that. But I mean, I'm pretty involved in leadership in the Massachusetts legal community, and despite all the reputation lawyers generally get, it really is a wonderful experience to be a lawyer and to be in a position to help other lawyers and help help people that can't get lawyers. So there's so many people who are so dedicated to the betterment of our community. That's really a pleasure to be here. So I just want to say those kind words about just, the folks who give back. And I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity as well, Neil, to talk with you today. It was a pleasure.
Well, Damian, I talk to a lot of attorneys during these shows, and the one thing that is apparent with all of them is that they are problem solvers. We look at the case of divorce, it's, above 50% now, I think. And, that's a major problem. And people need advocates like yourself to handle those problems for them. So, yes, attorneys definitely play a great role in society and making everything run smoothly. Well, Damian, if people want to reach out to you personally, if they're in the Massachusetts area, what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, we have our website's a great resource, so they can go to our website, which is turcolegal.com. That's TURCOLEGAL.com. Or they can call our main number. We have an 866 number. The number is 866-995-6663. We represent people across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We also have clients across the country who have cases here in Massachusetts. So I'm happy to be a resource.
Excellent stuff. Well, I've definitely enjoyed talking with you today, Damian, and learned a lot. Thank you very much for being my guest on the Trust Factor Radio today.
Thanks so much, Neil.
And to our listening audience, if you like what you hear, hit that like button and share, and we'll see you next time on the show.
You've been listening to the Trust Factor Radio with Neil Howe. To learn about the resources mentioned in the show and to listen to past episodes, go to thetrustfactorradio.com. To get a copy of the book, The Trust Factor, go to thetrustfactorbook.com. If you are ready to act now and build your authority, credibility, and trust, schedule a consultation with Neil at theauthorityarchitect.com.